The job was a gift from the universe, or at least that's what I told myself. 3 solid months of work, paid up front, doing the one thing I was truly good at. My name is Leo, and my world is one of frequencies, waveforms, and the subtle art of clean sound. I'm a freelance audio engineer. My studio isn't much. A converted walk-in closet in my small apartment, walls covered in dark gray acoustic foam that swallows sound and light with equal hunger. It's my sanctuary. In here, with my headphones on, the chaos of the outside world dissolves into pure, manageable data. The project was remastering the entire back catalog of The Shadowcast, a massively popular true horror podcast. I was a fan myself. The hosts, Carter and Jenna, had a way of storytelling that was both compelling and deeply unsettling. My job was to take their early, rougher recordings and bring them up to the polished standard of their more recent episodes. This meant noise reduction, evening out levels, cutting coughs, and generally tidying up the audio so that nothing stood in the way of the listening experience. It was meticulous, solitary work, exactly how I liked it. I started with episode 1 from 5 years ago. The difference in quality was stark. You could hear the hum of a cheap computer fan, the echo of an untreated room. Carter and Jenna sounded younger, their voices full of an earnest energy that hadn't yet been honed into the chilling confidence they now possessed. I set about my work, my fingers dancing across my keyboard, applying filters and running processes I could do in my sleep. My first task was to eliminate the room tone, that low-level ambient noise present in any recording. I use a fairly sophisticated piece of software that can learn a noise profile from a silent section and then subtract it from the entire track. I found a 2-second pause where both hosts were quiet and fed it to the algorithm. The software highlighted the noise it was going to remove. I saw the expected low-frequency hum of electronics, a bit of high-frequency hiss from the preamp. But there was something else, a strange rhythmic pulse in the very low mid-range, a tiny repeating mountain range on the spectral analyzer. Curiosity got the better of me. I bypassed the noise reduction, isolated that 2-second clip, and looped it. I cranked the gain, pushing the volume far beyond what any normal person would listen to. My professional-grade headphones, which normally deliver sound with pristine clarity, filled with a roar of digital noise. But underneath it, I could hear it. A sound so faint it was more of a feeling, a slow, steady rhythm. The sound of air being drawn in and then gently released. Breathing. It was impossibly quiet, almost subliminal. I checked the separate audio tracks for each host. Carter's mic was clean. Jenna's was clean. They were breathing, of course, but their breaths were sharp, distinct events tied to their speech. This was different. This was a constant, a presence in the background, a metronome of life hidden beneath the noise floor. I shook my head, a small smile playing on my lips. It had to be an old air conditioner, or maybe the building's ventilation system, creating a sound that my brain, steeped in hours of audio work, was misinterpreting as biological. Auditory pareidolia. Seeing faces in clouds, but for the ears. I dismissed it, ran the noise reduction, and the anomaly, along with the room hum, vanished. The audio was clean. I moved on. For the next week, I worked my way through the first year of The Shadowcast. The stories were fantastic. Tales of unsolved disappearances, ghost lights on lonely highways, and urban legends that felt a little too real. I fell into a comfortable rhythm. Work all night, sleep when the sun came up. My only company, the disembodied voices of Carter and Jenna, and the ever-present glow of my monitors. With each episode, their production quality improved slightly. By episode 50, the cheap computer hum was gone. They had clearly invested in better equipment. It was on episode 52 that I felt the first real prickle of unease. The topic was the Watcher House, a home where the family claimed to hear constant, faint whispers just on the edge of hearing. During a particularly tense pause in Jenna's narration, I stopped to remove a small pop from her track. As I zoomed in on the waveform, I decided on a whim to check the silence again. I isolated the pause. I amplified it. The hiss of the old room was gone, the sound was much cleaner now, and that made the other sound clearer. The breathing was still there, but it had changed. It was louder. Not by much, just a few decibels, but in my world, a few decibels is a chasm. The faint, airy whisper had been replaced by something with more texture, a slightly wet, guttural quality. It sounded closer. My heart did a strange little stutter step in my chest. This was illogical. They were in a new recording space. All the old equipment was gone. There was no rational explanation for the same audio artifact to persist across such a fundamental change. I scrubbed through the episode, finding every moment of dead air. It was there in all of them, a constant, lurking presence. I opened up episode 1 again and compared the two. The difference was undeniable. In episode 1, the sound was like someone breathing across a large room. In episode 52, it was like they were standing in the corner. This is what I do for a living. I find and destroy unwanted sounds. But this sound was starting to feel wanted, like it belonged there. I tried to rationalize it again. This was my first moment of what I now call the false calm. I told myself that maybe one of the hosts had developed a slight wheeze, or perhaps their new, more sensitive microphones were simply picking up a nuance that was always there. It was a flimsy explanation, a threadbare blanket against a rising chill, but I clung to it. It allowed me to keep working. I ran the noise reduction, a little more aggressively this time, and scrubbed the breathing from existence. Over the next month, I churned through 2 more years of the podcast. 200 episodes of meticulously crafted horror, and with each one, my obsession grew. I stopped listening to the stories themselves. Instead, I was listening to the silence. I had developed a routine. Open the file, find the first pause, isolate, amplify, listen. The progression was undeniable, and it was terrifying. With each passing block of episodes, the breathing grew louder, more defined. The spectral analysis showed the frequencies becoming richer, more complex. It was no longer just a low-mid hum. Higher frequencies were starting to appear. The subtle, sharp sounds of moisture on a tongue, the soft click of a throat. It felt like I was listening to a creature slowly evolving, adapting to its environment of sound waves and silence. By year 3, it was no longer in the corner of the room. It was standing just behind the hosts. I could hear it so clearly now, a ragged, patient inhalation that seemed to hang in the air just after Carter finished a sentence. It was so distinct that I was shocked that no one else had ever noticed it. Millions of people listened to this podcast. Was I the only one who could hear the third person in the room? The false calm became harder to achieve. I'd finish an episode, my hands shaking slightly, and force myself to get up. I'd walk out of my soundproof closet into my quiet apartment. I'd make coffee, stare out the window at the city lights, and tell myself it was a prank. A long-form audio prank by the hosts, a subtle Easter egg for obsessive sound engineers like me. It was brilliant, I'd tell myself. I'd laugh, a hollow, unconvincing sound in the stillness of my kitchen. Then I would return to the gray foam walls, put on my headphones, and the fear would come rushing back in. The laughter was a lie. There was nothing funny about this. The second major escalation happened when I reached the beginning of the most recent season. Episode 412. The production quality was now immaculate. Their voices were like velvet, the sound was pristine. The topic was a deep dive into the legend of the Echo Man, a creature that supposedly lived in old radio waves and mimicked the voices of broadcasters. An uncomfortable parallel. Jenna was describing a piece of evidence, a recording from the 1970s of a number station that went haywire. She paused for dramatic effect, letting the weight of her words settle. And in that perfect studio silent gap, I heard it without any amplification at all. A short, sharp, wet intake of breath. It was so clear, so present, it sounded like it was right next to Carter's $1 million microphone. I ripped my headphones from my ears, my heart hammering against my ribs. The silence of my studio was suddenly deafening. I looked around the small space, at the foam pyramids on the walls, at the sealed door. I was alone. I had to be alone. I forced myself to put the headphones back on, my hands trembling. I rewound the audio, my finger hovering over the play button. I had to be sure. I played it again. There it was, unmistakable. A living, breathing sound. But the strangest part, the part that truly broke my understanding of acoustics, was what my software was telling me. I had the 2 host tracks, Carter and Jenna, separated. I soloed Carter's track. The breath wasn't there. I soloed Jenna's. Not there either. But when I played them together, the mixed down master track, it was there. It was a phantom. An auditory illusion that only existed in the combination of the 2. It was a sound that had no source. It was being born in the silence between them. The logical part of my brain screamed that it was impossible. phase cancellation, acoustic artifacts, intermodulation distortion. I cycled through every technical explanation I could think of. None of them fit. A sound cannot simply manifest from the absence of other sounds. It defies the laws of physics. I worked feverishly, my analytical mind taking over from the fear. I started running advanced diagnostics, comparing the phase relationships between the two vocal tracks. What I found made no sense. In the moments of silence, the noise floor of the two separate tracks was behaving erratically. It was almost as if an unseeable third waveform was interacting with them, canceling itself out when they were isolated, but becoming audible when they were combined. I was looking at the ghost footprints in the digital snow. That was the end of any pretense of this being a prank or an equipment malfunction. This was something else. Something active, something impossible. The false calm I tried to summon this time was weak, pathetic. I told myself I was exhausted, that I'd been listening to horror stories for 1,000 hours, and my mind was finally cracking. I was projecting my own anxieties onto the audio. It was a plausible theory, the kind a therapist might offer. But I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that it wasn't true. What I was hearing was real. I abandoned my methodical chronological approach. I needed to know where this was going. I went to their website and downloaded the latest episode, released just 2 days ago. Episode 478. My hands were slick with sweat as I dragged the file into my project. The title of the episode was The Mimic's Lament. I didn't even bother listening to the content. I scrubbed through the timeline, my eyes scanning the flat line of the waveform during the pauses. I found a long 5-second silence Carter had left after a particularly shocking reveal in his story. I put my cursor at the beginning of it. I took a deep breath. I pressed play. For the first 3 seconds, there was nothing. Absolute, pristine digital black. My shoulders sagged with a profound, disbelieving relief. It was gone. Whatever it was gone. Maybe they had finally figured it out, found the source, and eliminated it. Maybe it was all over. And then, in the 4th second of silence, a new sound appeared. It wasn't breathing. It was a whisper. A soft, wet, malformed sound. A rough, guttural attempt at speech. It was low and raspy, like the breathing had been, but it was shaped, modulated. It was trying to form a word. I couldn't make it out at first. I looped it again and again, straining to decipher it. I ran it through a dozen filters, trying to clarify the phonetics. And then I heard it. It was mimicking Jenna. It was trying to copy the cadence and tone of the last word she had spoken before the silence. The word was alone, but the whisper wasn't saying alone. It was distorted, broken. It sounded like Leo, my name. No. I collapsed back in my chair, the blood draining from my face. That was impossible. It had to be a coincidence. It was just a random collection of phonemes that my terrified brain was twisting into my own name. It had to be. I kept listening, frantically scrubbing through the rest of the episode. The breathing was completely gone. In its place, in every silent pause, were these wet, nascent whispers. Fragments of words spoken by the hosts, copied and regurgitated by this thing. It was like a baby bird learning to chirp. Only this was something ancient and obscene, and it was learning to speak from a diet of horror stories. It was learning fear. It was learning murder. It was learning darkness. And then I heard the second word. It was at the very end of the podcast after the outro music faded. A single isolated whisper in the final second of silence before the file ended. This one was clearer. It was mimicking Carter's deep, resonant voice. And the word was, listen, a command. The illusion of my safe, foam-lined world shattered. This wasn't just a passive entity anymore. It wasn't just existing. It was aware. It was learning. And it knew I was there. I was the one listening to the silences. I was the one who'd been tracking it for months. I felt like a zoologist who had just realized the specimen he was observing under a microscope was staring back at him. Panic set in cold and sharp. I shut down my computer. I scrambled out of my studio, slamming the heavy door behind me as if that could contain it. My apartment, usually a haven of comfortable quiet, felt menacing. Every shadow seemed to stretch. The hum of the refrigerator sounded like a low growl. The silence was the worst part. It was no longer empty. It was expectant. I had to warn them. Carter and Jenna, they had to know what they were broadcasting to the world, hidden within their own voices. I spent an hour composing a frantic, rambling email. I tried to sound professional, to explain the acoustic phenomena I had discovered in technical terms, but the terror bled through. I described the progression of the breathing, the manifestation of the whispers, the chilling mimicry. I hit send, my heart pounding. I waited. The hours ticked by. No reply. Of course not. It was the middle of the night. They were probably asleep. Or worse, they'd see the email and dismiss it as the ravings of a lunatic fan. A sound engineer who'd spent too long in the dark listening to ghosts. I needed proof. Undeniable proof. Something more than just my word. I decided to document my findings. I would make a recording of my own, a video for my screen, showing the waveforms, the spectral analysis, my process. I would record my own voice explaining what I had found, step by step. If they wouldn't listen to my words, they would have to believe the data. I went back into the studio. The air was cold, heavy. I powered everything back on. The familiar glow of my monitors did little to comfort me. I opened a new audio project. I calibrated my own microphone, a high-end condenser mic that could pick up the sound of a pin dropping from across the room. I took a deep, shaky breath, and I began to speak. I explained everything, my voice tight with a fear I couldn't conceal. I talked about episode 1, the faint breathing I dismissed as an anomaly. I loaded the file and showed the waveform. I talked about its progression, its evolution. I demonstrated how it was absent from the individual tracks, but present in the master. I played the whisper. I recorded every click of my mouse, every step of my process. The entire recording took about 15 minutes. When I was done, I leaned back, exhausted but satisfied. This was it. This was the proof. I saved the project and prepared to play it back, just to check the quality of my own narration before I exported the video. I placed the headphones over my ears. The seal they created plunged me back into that intimate, isolated world of pure sound. I hit the spacebar. My own voice filled my ears, thin and strained. My name is Leo, and I'm the audio engineer for the Shadowcast. I'm making this recording because I've found something in the files, something that shouldn't be there. I listened to myself recount the whole story. The sound was clean. My microphone was working perfectly. I reached the end of my narration. My recorded voice said, "This is my proof. Please, listen carefully." Then there was silence. The silence of my own recording. The silence of my own studio. And in that silence, I heard it. A sound so quiet, so close, it was inside my own head. A wet, shallow intake of breath. It was in my recording. It was in my room. My blood turned to ice. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I stared at the flat line on my monitor, the waveform of my own silence. And I saw it, the tiniest flicker, a phantom pulse. It had followed me, or it had always been here. The podcast wasn't the source. It was just a carrier, an amplifier. Silence was its medium, and it had flowed from their recordings, through the internet, through my headphones, and into my room, into my silence. With a hand that felt like it belonged to someone else, I reached for the mouse. I highlighted the final 2 seconds of silence on my recording. I amplified it, my movements jerky, robotic. I pushed the gain to its absolute limit. I played the loop. The sound was there. The soft, wet breath. And something else. A whisper. It was just a fragment, a rough, guttural attempt at a word. But I knew what it was trying to say. It was mimicking the last word I had spoken. Carefully, the sound was no longer copying Carter or Jenna. It was learning from me. It was in my files. It was in my home. I'm sitting here now in my perfectly silent, soundproof studio. The power's off. The monitors are dark. But I can't bring myself to leave, because I know what's waiting for me outside this door. The silence of my apartment. The silence of the world. And I know it's listening. It's in every pause, every quiet moment. Waiting. Evolving. Learning. I haven't spoken a word in hours. I'm afraid of what I might teach it to say next. I don't know what happens when it finally learns to speak perfectly, but I think I'm beginning to understand the story of the old lighthouse keeper who was found in a room full of smashed clocks and mirrors. Join me next time as we explore what he was trying so desperately to silence.